Hey guys, today I'm showing you how to make this Hippo Birdie Two Ewe birthday card. For more information, head over to my blog melcrafting.blogspot.com. So the inspiration for this card is this background that I made using a sort of like a turnabout stamp that I bought off AliExpress. So I'll give you a link in the top right hand corner when I post the video on how to use those sort of third-party turnabout stamps that are turnabout stamps, but they don't have the template with them that you would usually get, and I'll show you how I make them work and how I made this background. Anyway, I also wanted to use this stamp set, which I also got off AliExpress. It's got this cute hippo and little sheep with a sentiment of Hippo Birdie Two Ewe, which I think is kind of cute. And I want to use up some leftovers I've got, so I've got this black circle that I want to use and these die cuts, which is from that stamp set, and I've watercolored these, and I'll link to up here to the markers I use to watercolor them. They are aquarelle dual tone STA aquarelle dual tone brush markers, so I'll link to the top. Give you a link at the top of this video to a review I did on those markers. Rightio. So the first step is to cut down that background so it would fit as a nice front note card on the front of a card base. So I just use a guillotine. This is a very cheap guillotine. I might do a review on this product once I've used it a bit more. There are a few little kinks, but it is pretty easy to use overall, and it does cut straight, but you've just got to know how to line it up correctly to make sure that you don't actually end up with a wonky edge. So I'm just going ahead and just taking off a couple of millimeters off each edge so that it will fit on the front of a standard card base. So I'm going to be using a standard, I think they call them A6 card base today, and I'll just put away my guillotine. When the next step is to bring back my background, bring in my black circle that I want to use, and I'm just going to try to arrange the card front and see how everything is going to fit together. So I've got my die cut images, my hippo, my birdie, and my two ewes, my two sheep, and I decide that I want them to be sort of standing or dancing around the top of the circle, because I had this idea in my head to put the sentiment of Hippo Birdie Two Ewe underneath them, and then put somewhere I want to also put the receiver's name. So I've grabbed that stamp, that sentiment stamp. I'm just going to position it to see roughly what it's going to look like. I've got that pretty much how I would like it, just sorting out the finer details. You'll see I've got quite a few plasters on at the moment on my right hand, and that's just because my eczema has flared at the moment and I've got cracked hands, so I put a few plasters on to stop them bleeding, sort of thing. So I've brought in my stamping platform. It's a We Are Memory Keepers precision press, because I've decided I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment onto the black circle. So I'm just using some washi tape to hold down that black circle, which is just cut out of normal standard 180 GSM cardstock. Just using some washi tape to hold it to the base of the stamping platform, and just roughly positioning the stamp that I'm going to heat emboss. And to make sure I get it in the right position with all the characters that I'm going to use, I just bring in the die cuts as well to make sure that there's going to be enough room for the receiver's name underneath the sentiment as well. Close the door on my stamping platform, pick up the stamp. Now I'm just going to remove those die cuts and bring in my anti-static powder tool. Use that to rub all over the circle cutout that I'm going to stamp onto. Now I'm going to bring in my clear embossing ink and ink up my sentiment stamp. And close the door on my stamping platform to stamp the sentiment onto the card. And do this a few times to make sure I get a good impression. Now the whole reason you use an anti-static powder tool is to make sure that the heat embossing powder only sticks to where you've stamped your image. Rightio. Now it's time to sprinkle some powder onto the sentiment. But first of all, I'm just going to grab a baby wipe and clean off my stamp before I forget. Remove the stamp and then remove my little project here. Remove the washi tape, remove the card with the stamp sentiment on it. Now I'm going to bring in some non-stick baking paper. I use non-stick baking paper so that I can recollect the excess embossing powder. I'm using silver embossing powder for this today. Just sprinkle it on really liberally, then tap it off. Do it a little flick to make sure that we get the excess all off. Now I've gone ahead and I've heat set that sentiment, melted the heat embossing powder using my heat tool. And it's come out quite nicely really. Next step, I'm going to bring back my background and bring in my sentimented circle, I guess I'm going to call it. My heat embossed sentiment on my black circle. And I'm decided I'm just going to adhere that down with some double-sided tape. So I've finished removing all the baking paper on the double-sided tape. I'm just going to adhere the black circle with the sentiment on it to the front of the background. Now I like to eyeball it because I'm, well, lazy, but you can use a ruler and line it up perfectly in the center if you're into that. Now I'm going to bring back my die cut images which have been watercolored and rearrange them to where I want to place them down, and arrange them rather where I want to place them. And again, I'm just going to adhere them down with some double-sided tape. I was going to use foam tape to give them a bit of dimension, but then I decided against it because there is these little tiny elements on these images which I felt would just get damaged and potentially break off in the mail if I put foam tape up on them. So I decided to just use standard double-sided tape to adhere these die cut images down. I also bring in my little glue pen to just add a bit of glue where the double-sided tape isn't adhering down the image, and it's just on those edges like the tail on the hippo and the little feet. Just gives it a little bit of extra hold so it doesn't get caught on anything and rip off the card. There's actually a review on these glue pens that I bought off AliExpress as well, which I'll put a link to in the top right hand corner. And to make sure it all holds down while it's drying, I use an acrylic block as a weight to hold it down flat while it's drying. And I do the same for the other 3 die cut images. I just use various sizes of double-sided tape, so here I'm using slightly thinner double-sided tape for the little birdie because it is quite thin, removing the backing paper, and then adding a bit of glue to the edges to make sure that it doesn't accidentally get caught and get ripped off the card. Rightio, so just put a acrylic block on all of those images to keep them flat while they dry and set in place. Now the glue I'm using does dry pretty quickly, so I will take it off very shortly. The next step is to do the sentiment strip, well, the name strip I'm going to call it, underneath the main Hippo Birdie Two Ewe sentiment. I decided to use a piece of the yellow cardstock that I trimmed off the background, and that will tie in nicely with the background because it is the exact same cardstock. And I decided that I'm going to create a little banner with the recipient's name. The recipient of this card is going to be Robert, who is the son of a friend or acquaintance, and he is turning 5 this weekend, so we are going to a birthday party for him, so I am making this card for him to go with his present. I'm just trying to decide which way I want the sentiment strip to lie, and I decide that I just want it straight across, horizontal, straight across underneath the main sentiment. I'm bringing in archival jet black ink from Ranger. I'm going to use that to stamp Robert's name, and I'm going to use a alphabet stamp set, Concord and 9th perfectly penned stamp set. So it has the scripty letters as well as the capital letters, so I'm going to be using the capital letters from the stamp set today. So I'm just arranging at the moment off camera. I'm just grabbing all of the letters that I'm going to need to spell out Robert's name, and I'll place them on a plastic sheet of acetate to the side off camera. And now I'm just going to stamp each letter individually. Decide that that strip is moving around a little too much for my liking, so before I stamp that first R, I just get a bit of washi tape to place on either side of the sentiment strip, of the strip of cardstock that I'm using to stamp Robert's name on, and then I stamp the R. Come in with the O on my acrylic block, tap it in the ink and stamp down the O, and I repeat this for the B, the E, the R and the T to make up Robert's name. Okay, so now that I've finished stamping Robert's name, I'm just cleaning up the stamps with the baby white. So I like to put them all on an acrylic block when I have lots of little stamps like this, and then get my baby white to clean them up. That way I lessen the chance of losing all these little tiny stamps because they're all on the acrylic block and they're all in one place, so I can clean them all at once. So I'm just going to put away my ink pad and my acrylic block and replace all of those little letter stamps on my stamp set. So I'm just doing that off camera at the moment. Okay, remove the washi tape holding down the strip of card with Robert's name on it, and then I'm just going to quickly arrange it on the front of the card under the sentiment, or the main sentiment of the card, to see how it quickly looks. Decide I'm going to place it about there and horizontal, going to maintain that horizontal look, and I'm tossing up whether to go right across over that U, or pull it up and put the U on top of the sentiment strip, or just place it under the sheep and go right to the edge of the card. I decide I'm just going to cut it into a banner. So how I cut these banners is I do a little slit in the center and then cut from either edge, and that gives you a nice little banner. I didn't quite cut that banner very well, so I've just recut it there to get a nice little point on the edge, and I decide that I'll banner the other side as well. So snip off a little edge and then come in with the same technique. Wonderful. So I'll just place it down to see how it looks. Awesome. So now I'm just going to grab some double-sided tape to adhere the receiver's name sentiment strip underneath the Hippo Birdie Two Ewe sentiment, and that'll be placed in between the hippo and the bottom U. So I'm removing the backing paper on the double-sided tape there and placing that sentiment down to personalize this card. Final step is to adhere this card front to a card base. I decided to just use a matching yellow card base. This is a standard A6 card base. And I noticed that the top is and the bottom are slightly overhanging the card base. So I decide to do a bit of a trim so that before I adhere it to the card base. So just bring in my guillotine again and just quickly chop off a few mils off the bottom of the card. And then I double check how that looks on the card base, and it looks fine. So I decide to adhere that card front to the card base using some double-sided tape. Now when I do my card fronts or attach my card fronts to my card bases, I like to put a border of tape around the edge of the card front and then place one or two pieces of double-sided tape in the middle, and that makes sure that it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, removing the backing paper on the double-sided tape and then adhering the card front to the card base. Now there's going to be two strips either side of the card front, so when I place it down I try and make sure that the widths of those two sides are even. And that's how I make this Hippo Birdie Two Ewe birthday card. Head over to my blog melcrafting.blogspot.com for more information, and thank you for watching.